Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another 30 minutes of chat this lunchtime. I'm Christina Lewis, and I'm here all week speaking to some incredible women for Hull Women's Week and International Women's Day. And today, I'm really excited to say we are joined by the Labour MP for Hull Western Hessle, Emma Hardy. Emma, I know you must be incredibly busy. I can't even imagine. So thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Fab. Well, I thought the first question that I'd ask you, because obviously you were elected in 2017 in the general election, and you studied politics at university, but between those points, you taught at Hull Primary School for 10 years. So what prompted your journey into politics from that point?
Well, as you say, I was working as an infant school teacher. So most of my career has been spent teaching children between the age of 4 and 7, which is, if you're interested, anyone interested in getting involved in teaching, it is a gorgeous age to teach because they're just a delight when they're sort of little like that. And I could spend most of the interview telling you about very amusing stories about school nativity plays, which is something I still miss and remember very fondly. But if things really changed in 2010, and I don't know how many people listening are parents, but there was changes in terms of examination and testing for children. They introduced, for example, a phonics test, the SATs test in year 2 became more serious. They changed the content of what pupils were being taught. And I, in a nutshell, didn't really agree with some of the changes that were happening. So I got involved in my local union, which was the NUT at the time, called the National Union of Teachers. And they came to talk to different members in the school about everything that was going on in education. And at this time, there was huge campaigns happening around raising of the retirement age. And I'm not sure if you remember, they pushed the retirement age up to 68 for teachers, and firefighters, police officers, and everybody. And there were massive campaigns against it because in 2010, it was, of course, when they introduced austerity. So I went down on a demonstration. I'd never been on a demonstration before. I hadn't been involved in anything, and I was really worried I was going to be kettled. And I was like thinking, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to be kettled, and there's going to be all these, And of course, when I got down to it, there wasn't at all. There was just, people marching along, and there was like a band, and there was some, drums and music, and there were people with buggies and children on shoulders. And I thought, well, this is, when you look sometimes on the news and you see like the little bit of bother that they had, you get this impression that it's, and it really wasn't. And what instead I found were lots and lots of people who felt the same way I did, who felt that they didn't agree with the changes that were being introduced. And, and it felt, I suppose, good to kind of realise that you're not the only one thinking this. Yeah. There's actually lots of other people thinking it. So I got really involved in the National Union of Teachers. And one of the things they asked us to do was to lobby our MP about what was going on. Now, my predecessor was Alan Johnson. So I went down to London with a couple of other teachers to go and meet him and lobby him and say, I don't like what's going on. And he was lovely, because if anyone's met Alan Johnson, he's such a nice man, and he was really charming and really lovely. And at the end of it, I was on the train on the way home, and I thought, do you know what, I'm going to join the Labour Party. And I sent him an email and said, thank you, so much for meeting me. It was such a pleasure. I'd like to join the Labour Party. Now, I'd been a member when I was at university, but sort of, just let it slide, never did anything. And he sort of sent me an email back saying, oh, that's lovely news. You'll be very welcome. And I, hope you enjoy getting involved. And that was that. So that was in 2011. And then from joining, I thought, right, I'm not just going to join. I'm going to join and do something. So I went down to my local meeting, which was in the Hessle town hall, and met some of the members who hit it off with, got on with them really well, and they were really welcoming. And then that really was that. And then you go from, anyone who knows, if you volunteer for anything, you start off just going, and the next thing you know, you're like the chair and the secretary, and you've become, this.
I know that well.
Yeah, whether it's, whatever voluntary organisation you end, as soon as you kind of show will again, was like, right, you can be the new, So I just ended up getting more and more involved in it. And then when Alan retired in 2017, and there was obviously a vacancy to stand as the Labour Party candidate, and I applied and got the nomination. So that's it.
So I guess the next, what I'm really interested in, and like we spoke about right at the beginning of this interview before it was recorded, I don't know a huge amount about politics, obviously, apart from what we read in the news or watching parliamentary debates. But what I'm really interested in is, what is the female experience of politics? Since you started being really politically active, have you seen the landscape change? Are we going in the right direction? And what more needs to be done to support women in politics?
I think things are improving, definitely. I mean, when I joined in 2017, there were quite a lot of women already as members of parliament. And in the Labour Party, we've got everyone's got your WhatsApp groups, but we've got a WhatsApp group which is for Labour women. It's surprisingly called the Labour Women WhatsApp group, and does what it says on the tin. And you know, where we can share things that are more related to, I suppose, what we're trying to campaign as women, and showing that, I suppose, just support and solidarity to each other. And since 2019, we've had more women elected. So now in the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, it's about 52% women. We have more women than we have men. So we're a really big group, and as a large group, sort of when we collectively decide to sort of campaign on an issue or push an issue, then we've got an awful lot of of clout, because we are now such a large group within the Labour Party. So I didn't face the difficulties I think some MPs faced who came before me, when they were sort of really felt in the minority. I mean, there were some things in Parliament which were a bit quaint. Like there's these rooms called lady members rooms, and it has written on the doors lady members, and inside they're sort of like they've got ironing boards and irons and hair dryers and sort of things like this.
We don't do ironing in our house. That would be an alien concept to me.
And I remember seeing them and thinking they're really quite sort of quaint. And it was from, I think, when we had our first members of parliament, and it was felt, well, ladies would require a separate area to the gentlemen for, I don't know, goodness knows what we're expected to all do in there. I mean, these aren't just for Labour Party, these are for female members of parliament. So they can be quite sociable spaces, actually. If you do go in there and need to use the iron or something, you can sort of find yourself chatting to female members of parliament from all different parties who've nipped in. So I find that is slightly unusual, from having gone from being a teacher, where of course it's nearly all women in primary schools, very few men, to finding that you're sort of in a minority. But I think it is definitely getting better. I think there's still the difference in terms of when you ask questions. I still find often journalists will say to me, how do you deal with being a mother and a member of parliament? And I don't mind being asked that.
Yeah.
I did say to my friend Carl, Carl Turner, the MP for Hull East, Carl, do you ever get asked, how do you cope with being a father and a member of parliament?
Yeah. Men are never asked that question, are they? How do you juggle fatherhood and your career? That is never asked, but it's something that's continually asked of us as women, which is really interesting, even still now. I mean, I was reading earlier that, I mean, in 2003, Wales was the first country to have equal men and women in Parliament, which, I mean, that's 2003. That does not seem so long ago at all, does it? And yet that's a huge landmark.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you are sort of, I think, viewed differently. You do have sort of, because I have to be away from my children, of course, and I'm down in London, you know, there is still that, oh, well, I couldn't leave mine. And you think, well, it's still more accepted, I think, for men to work away and to be away from their children than it is for women. But as I say, I do think things are changing, and I think things are improving. And you think, well, when I got there, things had definitely moved on. When I speak to Harriet Harman, who was one of the first ever Labour MPs elected to Parliament, and how different it was, when she was there, we are making progress, but slowly. I was once told this, I probably shouldn't say in the lunchtime interview, rather amusing story about a female, when Betty Boothroyd used to be the Speaker, was the first female Speaker of the Houses of Parliament. And a female member of Parliament went to her complain that when she spoke in Parliament, the male members on the benches opposite, the male MPs, shouted melons at her over and over again whenever she stood up to speak. Oh. And Betty Boothroyd said to her, well, she's listened to what she said, and she said, well, thank you for drawing that to my attention. What I recommend, my dear, is next time that happens, ask your friends to shout back chipolatas.
Sound advice.
Yeah, and I thought that was really quite amusing, but it kind of illustrated, I think, what female members of Parliament were sort of facing when they were in there previously, so I can only say I've never had anything like that happen with me, so it has definitely improved.
I think to an outsider looking in, it looks like a really kind of daunting environment. I think when I see like yourself and other MPs standing up and giving these incredibly eloquent, together speeches, sometimes being heckled, other people making noises of dissent through your speech, it seems so daunting. You must obviously have to be so strong and have so much belief, obviously, in what you're doing to kind of carry on through that.
Yeah, I mean, but I've done many a school assembly. So
oh well, in that case, perfect training.
Do you know, it's quite funny. Someone said, "Oh, you seem really comfortable." I said, "Well, when you have, stood up in front of an assembly full of people and teachers and sometimes parents, you kind of, I know it sounds silly, but that's how I kind of think of it. I think of it as in like, it sounds awful, but I'm there. It's just a school assembly, and I thought if I just think of it that way, it's a school assembly, and I'm, there telling them whatever it is I think, and then as we've mentioned before, some of them behave like children, so then they get.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to say that, but it was running through my mind. There's definitely a lot of parallels between being a primary school teacher and being a member of Parliament.
Yeah, well, my first ever time, I asked a question for the first ever time in Parliament, and afterwards my friend sent me a message and just said she couldn't stop laughing because she said you did such a teacher thing of someone tried to heckle you and you went like shh. I know, and I sort of watched it back, and I've tried not to be quite such a teacher in there, but I think if you kind of, I think if I feel, in my head, think this is just, I'm standing up and I'm making my opinion, and I think it's also that sense of, we're all equal in there. Everybody represents their area. There's not one area that's more important than any other area. Therefore, what I have to say is as valid as what the Prime Minister says, or as valid as what whoever says, because I'm talking about people in whole Western Hessle. So I kind of, if you have that sense of, no, you should listen to what I have to say, because I'm talking on behalf of 60,000+ people who live here. So I think, but yeah, you do have to just, brush it off.
Yeah, I guess you must have to have and develop quite a thick skin.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're all human, and sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes things get to me. Sometimes you can just ignore them. But you've just got to, I think, try and ignore a lot of it.
Yeah.
Just trying to, brush it off and focus on, what really matters and who really matters.
I've been reading a little bit about your work with Endometriosis UK and the menstrual well-being. Would you mind just talking a little bit more about that? Because I just think it's so important. I mean, I've got a daughter who's about to hit her teenage years, and it's so important to have really open, honest conversations, because it's a really, really scary time, and mentally we obviously want to make sure that young women are protected and know that they can talk really openly about stuff like periods, which still, some people treat a bit like a dirty word. We can't talk about it, the most natural thing in the world. So I wondered if you'd talk a little bit more about that and kind of what issues at the moment are really important for you in terms of what women and young women are facing.
Oh, I'm so pleased you asked me about this, because this March is Endometriosis Awareness Month. So I'm really pleased you mentioned it. So you probably know, but those listening who don't, endometriosis is when the cells that should grow inside the womb grow outside of the womb. So the cells that sort of swell and shed and create the period grow in the wrong place, and nobody knows why. there's no understanding or enough research. Now, we could have an hour's conversation on the little research that's done into women's health problems and why we still don't understand this, but that's the situation. We don't know why. So it can grow around ovaries, it can grow around the bowel, around the bladder, around anything in that area, and cause incredible pain for the women who suffer from it. And the only treatment is either, well, in the extreme case, a hysterectomy, or having it scraped, having an operation where the cells are physically scraped off the different organs or where they are, or having a medically drug-induced early menopause to stop you having periods. So there isn't really an awful lot in terms of treatment or pain management. And so for women who suffer from it, as I say, it's incredibly painful, and it can cause problems where it makes different parts of your inside stick together. So it will can join your bowel and your, so it's really awful. 1 in 10 women have endometriosis, and it takes on average 7.5 years to be diagnosed. Now, I was saying to them, why have so many people got endometriosis? Why does it take such a long time? And they were saying to me, because we as women in general are starting periods earlier and having them for longer because of the changes in our diets and everything else, there's more chance to develop endometriosis, whereas sort of our grandparents' age, they started periods later and they generally finished periods earlier. So it's why it's why now we're getting teenage girls with endometriosis who sort of 30 years ago probably wouldn't have had them until later on. And so really it's about raising awareness of it and looking for early signs. Not that there is any particular treatment you can have, but obviously there's ways to manage it if you understand the condition that you've got. And so menstrual well-being is really about teaching girls and boys what's a normal period. So from so many women I've spoken to who said to me, well, my mum always had heavy periods, I just thought I had heavy periods. And not understanding, well, what's a normal period? How long should a normal period last? I mean, we all get, I suppose, pain when we are on our periods, but what's a normal level of pain? When should you tell someone when the pain is too much? And it's really, that's why I wanted it in the curriculum, and it is now, which is brilliant. We got it in the curriculum, it's great. So it will be getting taught, is just to have that understanding, with the idea being that we can shorten the time it takes to diagnose, so that if you know that you're having that your period and you think, actually this is really heavy and it's lasting a really long time and I'm not able to get out of bed, I'm in such pain, that you realize actually this isn't normal and you do need to speak to someone, and it could be that you've got endometriosis.
Wow, there was a lot of that actually I didn't know. That's really, really interesting. And it's so important, isn't it, that there's just that information out there so that people can kind of listen to their bodies and make a decision to speak to professionals. If Emma, if people needed to find out any more about that, where would they go?
Well, I'd look at the charity Endometriosis UK. So they're fantastic. They're only a small charity. They're not sort of really well known. But if you have a look on their website, there's loads of questions and there's a helpline and there's information. And there's I think there's a group in Hull. I think there's a Facebook group which is called, I think, Endometriosis Hull, which is a private Facebook group for women who suffer endometriosis. And there are some good positive signs being shown at the moment. I mean, this was all before the pandemic, but the University of Hull were doing research into trying to develop tests, urine tests, to find out whether someone has endometriosis. Because at the moment, the only way you can diagnose endometriosis is through having a camera inserted and actually physically looking and seeing it. Because it's blood, you can't scan it and you can't x-ray it, because it's blood cells, so it won't show up. So you have to use a camera. So there's research starting to happen. But I think, again, 1 in 10 women have this. It's absolutely massive. It's the main reason for infertility for women. It's the main cause of infertility. But we still don't know why some women get it. And we still really don't have any cures or any effective treatment for it. And I see one of my roles, I suppose, as the female member of parliament, is to say, hang on, this is a really important issue. Now, we don't want to compare, but if it was erectile dysfunction, I'm sure there'd be a few more people talking about it and a bit more money going into the research. And so I think I kind of try and champion it and just raise awareness so that we can hopefully stop more women having to suffer the pain of having it.
Yeah, and 1 out of 10 women is a astronomically huge number of women, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and as I say, 7.5 years, and I was talking to this young woman who was at university and had to drop out of university because she had it so badly and she was suffering so much that, if you have it, and then it's then about sort of speaking to your university or speaking to your school. So we had other women who were sacked for regular non-attendance because they had endometriosis, and found that every month they were having to sort of have 1 or 2 days off. But it's things like this, making employers aware, raising awareness so that so that if people have endometriosis, they're not treated as sort of people who are skiving off work, or people who are just not showing up to school, or so there's can be mitigating circumstances, and that level of understanding and that's just what we need. I mean, we just need people to appreciate that for some women with endometriosis, for 2 or 3 days a month, they can't work. But how can we work around that?
So for you right now, in the here and now, what for you are the other most important issues facing women?
Well, I think the pandemic hasn't impacted everybody equally. I mean, because a lot of women have, it still is quite traditional. Women have responsibility, often have responsibility for the homeschooling side of things. I mean, this isn't just my opinion. Many surveys have shown that tradition, that we still have those traditional roles for women in having to do a lot more of the homeschooling. Therefore, we're seeing more women impacted with their work, not able to work to the same level or perform to the same level they used to, because they're juggling homeschooling as well as trying to sort of do something for their own career. And so there's a real fear that this could impact sort of women when it comes to promotional opportunities, when it comes to getting those permanent contracts, if they've been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And also there's many women are in caring roles and caring responsibility roles. So if you look, the majority of nurses are women, the majority of carers are women. So women are being put in situations and in roles where they're at higher risk from the pandemic as well. So I think, when we sort of look at how it's impacted women in terms of their in their roles and in their careers, it's been quite disproportional. So I think one of the things we do need to do is to try and level that playing field for women again. And and look at what can be done. And obviously you probably expect me to say I'll keep talking about giving our key workers a pay rise, because women are still underpaid, and and there still is this gender pay gap. And but what more can be done, and making companies aware, and making companies take this more seriously, because we're more than half of the whole population. It's about time. It's not special treatment for women, it's just equal treatment for women. And I think, that's what we all want.
Yeah, 100%. Just to bring it back to you personally, Emma, I can only relate it to something that I know really well, which is writing. And for me, I can be doing something or try and sit down and actually enjoy a bit of time out, but I'll always be kind of running through some dialogue or something in my head. Is it the same for you? Can you ever switch off from your role, or are you always thinking about a constituent or a speech or whatever it might be?
I find switching off really difficult. I think that's fair to say. Just as you say, you often rehearse letters you're writing, or you're thinking about things, and sometimes when you're going off to sleep and you think, oh gosh, I must remember tomorrow that I need to send that letter back to that person, or that person got in contact with me. And so it is difficult. It is difficult to switch off. But to be honest, I found it difficult to switch off when I was a teacher as well, because I think if you're doing a job you really care about, it is really hard to switch off. So I found, even when I was teaching, I'd be thinking about the children in the class, or, if one of them had been had an issue at home, or having some difficult, you can't, it is quite difficult just not to switch off from it. But what I try and do, and this is like really lame, is on a night time, to try and relax myself, is that I watch the Food Network.
I think that's great. It works for you.
But I sit there and I try and watch it before I go to sleep, because I just find watching people talking about food and cooking just quite relaxing. And then
I understand that.
I know, but it is really, really boring. But then, because then I can go to sleep thinking, because I'm getting quite into sort of cooking and trying new recipes and things. I can go to sleep thinking about food as opposed to thinking
The best thing to think about.
Yeah, so it's the Food Network is great. So Pioneer Woman, Diners, Drive-In and Dives. They're all like American, like
really over the top.
Oh, the Pioneer Woman is something else. I mean,
I haven't seen that. Pioneer Woman.
It's a treat. She works on a ranch, and it's her husband's sort of like cowboy, and they've got this ranch, and she's cooking all this sort of food for the boys, and it's just.
That sounds great.
It's amazing.
Well, that kind of brings us neatly on to my next question, which is kind of a bit of a throwaway question. But if you were to have a dinner party, who would your 5 guests be? And they can be dead or alive or fictional or real. But who would you invite?
Oh, gosh, I should have thought about this question in advance, shouldn't I? Well, aside from sort of family and friends who are no longer with us, who I'd love to have them back for a dinner party. I'd love to bring them back together. So thinking more keeping it light. Thinking of sorts of other people who I'd really like to have a dinner with. I mean, I'm quite fascinated by other women from Hull, I suppose. We've just had the bridge, haven't we? Mary Murdoch. I think she sounds so much fun.
Yeah, she'd be a character.
Yeah, driving around in a motor car, sort of racing around through the city of, through the city of Hull as one of the first women GPs, first woman to sort of have a car. I bet she was great fun.
Oh, yeah.
So she'd be quite fun to have if we were kind of thinking about Hull. Of course, Amy Johnson would be quite fun. I think she'd be quite to have a dinner party with and sort of get to know. I think people like that, I really admire, people who must have faced such difficulty and yet overcome it. And I think that would be quite an amusing dinner party. And I'll have to think about who else I'd have in my fictional dinner party. But I can imagine if Mary Murdoch's anything like we sort of read about her, that she'd be up all night, wouldn't she?
To be honest, I don't think you'd need any more guests, because I think your hands would be full with Mary and Amy.
I think that would be great fun. And I suppose because they lived at sort of fairly similar times, and it'd be great to have a 1920s themed dinner party.
Yeah, that would be great.
That would be quite fun. But do you know who else I'd love to meet though? Dolly Parton.
Oh, she's one of my idols. She'd be amazing.
I just love her, absolutely love her, and I'd love to have her. Yeah, I'd love to have her around, because she's another sort of almost pioneering woman who changed things at a time when women weren't taken very seriously. So I think she'd be really great to have as a dinner party guest.
What's incredible about Dolly Parton as well, she deals with everything with such an amazing sense of humour, but she's also incredibly humble, because I read recently that they wanted to put a statue up of her, and she released this incredible statement that just said, I think there's more things going on in the world than putting me on a pedestal. So, maybe in the future, if you still want me, I'll do it. But for now, I think it's not the right time. And I just thought, yeah, that's just so typical of Dolly Parton, and no wonder she's got such an incredible fan base, because she's just such an amazing personality.
She is, and she's never forgotten, where she's from. I mean, she's funding a book scheme in Hull for children, at the age of 2, and you think, how amazing is this woman who's made all this money, and she still cares about disadvantaged children and still cares about making a difference. And I think she'd be a great dinner party guest. This is going to be the funnest party. If we've got Mary, Amy, Dolly Parton could sing us a tune.
It would be an absolute riot. You'd have neighbours banging on your door, left, right, and centre, but then probably joining the party, because it would be so much fun.
I think so. I think I definitely have to be checking the Food Network for some good recipes.
Get on it, Emma. Get some good recipes.
Yeah, that's what we need.
Well, sadly, our time is nearly up, which I don't want it to be because I could chat to you forever. But one last question just before we leave. Any women who are considering a career in politics or who are just starting out in politics, what would your advice be?
Keep going, I think, is the advice. And also, before I sort of became the candidate, I was the women's officer, and we set up sort of, which is within the Labour Party, you have officers, you know, for different roles and positions, and I was a women's officer, and we set up a group of sort of, you know, women who were Labour Party members, and having that support, that sisterhood and that support from other women, I found, you know, such a source of strength. And when I was thinking about putting myself forward, and I put a message, I took my WhatsApp features a lot in my life into our women's WhatsApp group, a different one. And they were like, oh no, you should go for it, you should really go for it, and we're really encouraging. And I think if we can all try and be that to other women as well, and I think having that sense of sisterhood. And I was really lucky in that when I got the nomination, I know Diana Johnson, of course, the MP for Hull North, was really supportive, and you know, and has and still continues to be. And so I think for women getting involved in politics, I'd say find other women. I mean, if they're Labour and they're interested, there's the Labour Women's Network, so you can join schemes, and there's the Jo Cox Women in Leadership scheme, which was named after, of course, Jo. So there's various schemes specifically to support women who want to get involved in the Labour Party, and I'm quite sure there'll be similar schemes for the other political parties, you know, if you're interested in sort of certain politics, and just, you know, have that confidence that we are more than half of the population. We have a voice, we have things that are worth saying, and just to kind of keep that strength really, and then keep going. And of course, if you're Labour and interested, you can always contact me.
Amazing. Emma, it's been an absolute pleasure. Although I should say just before I go, how do people contact you if they want to?
So if they contact me, it's probably always best to email me, because we were saying before, I don't always see my social media notifications. So if you want to guarantee a response, send me an email, which will be emma.hardy.mp@parliament.uk.
There you go. If you are interested in politics and the Labour Party, get involved with Emma. And as you'll see, she's just the most approachable, warm, fantastic human being, and she will help you. Emma, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. It's been brilliant. And thank you for taking part.
No problem. Thanks for asking me.